I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. It's fair to say Joe Biden has had some significant wins in his first 10 months in office. Congress passed the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill, which sent stimulus checks to millions of Americans and gave the ailing economy a shot in the arm. He signed the bipartisan $1 trillion public works bill in mid-November. That should mean thousands of blue-collar jobs repairing roads, bridges, and water systems. His social policy and climate spending bill passed the House. The outlook in the Senate still uncertain. These policies are popular with the American public, but that hasn't translated into strong poll numbers for Biden. The new Hill-Harris X poll shows an uptick for the president, but with only 44% approving of the job he's doing, 45% disapproving. The Economist YouGov direction of the country poll is pretty grim. 28% say the country is heading in the right direction. 62% say we're on the wrong track. The Times writes, quote, in poll after poll, voters seem to give Mr. Biden no credit for his agenda. They say he hasn't accomplished much. They say he hasn't helped them personally, even though he sent direct stimulus payments to most households and even more to parents. If anything, voters say he's made things worse. So what's Biden's problem? Is it just messaging or something deeper? And with a new COVID variant that forced travel restrictions and rattled the markets already, and inflation at a 31-year high, what can Biden do to turn things around politically? We're joined by Eleanor Randolph, a contributing writer for the New York Times, and Clyde Haberman, also a Times contributing writer. Eleanor, is this a problem with the message, the messenger, or is there something more fundamentally wrong? Is this COVID malaise? What's going on now that with the number of things that Biden has done in almost a first year in office, that the polls are this bad for him?
Well, I mean, you're right. That list, you're right with that list. But the thing is that I think there's no Barnum and Bailey in him. He doesn't seem to be able to sell what he's done. And the Republicans on the other side have these people who go up to the microphone and get audiences, bring them to their feet. I've never seen Biden bring an audience to their feet. I mean, he's the thing that I personally like about him is that I'm not terrified every morning when I look at Twitter or the morning feed. I mean, he's very methodical. He's very sort of easygoing. And even this new COVID strain, he says we should be concerned but not panicked about it. And that seems to be the right response. It probably doesn't sell well on Instagram, but it is where we are now. I mean, to me, the real question I have is what's going to happen with the Fed and the way we deal with inflation, and that's sort of the main weakness we have in the Biden presidency right now, and it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with it.
Clyde, I thought when we analyzed the election just about a year ago this time, we said that people wanted to return to normalcy, however we defined that. So we've got Republicans bringing people to their feet, but what are they bringing their people to their feet about when Biden seems to be delivering pretty much on what he promised them and things that people ought to be happy with?
The National Republican Party is a party that has absolutely no program, Sam. They are simply negative people. They're against this. they've been against Obamacare, for example, now for the last 12 years, and they have not once that I can recall come up with a plan of their own to replace it. It is pure negativism. Biden hasn't been mentioned, is also handicapped by the fact that he has no real majority in the Senate and the barest of majorities in the House. So all you need are a few Democrats, and Republicans are almost entirely in lockstep on just about every issue imaginable, so that with the exception of how to deal with the January 6th uprising. And so you can't lose anybody. And they have people who should be ignored until the end of time, but suddenly are powerful people like Joe Manchin and Sinema out in Arizona. So he's in a bind. Could he do more LBJ style arm twisting? And, you know, I was reminded of a wonderful photo of LBJ leaning like this over a recalcitrant lawmaker. And you could just feel the poor guy's back bending over backwards. Well, that's not who Joe Biden is. Maybe an LBJ could have gotten away with it. LBJ also had a 2/3 majority in each house, Democratic majority in each house of Congress. So he's in a bit of a bind, and he's not a spellbinder in terms of his speech, and he's not a spellbinder in terms of personality. He's also a bit old, and he's looking it on any given day, and I sympathize with that, being only a few years behind him in that regard. But it is a factor too, I suspect.
Eleanor, why is it that the Democrats seem to be, and of course, lots of things change very quickly, as we've learned in this and other election cycles, seem to be underdogs going into 2022 and possibly 2024? We've seen 51% of people say they'd vote for the Republican in their district, the most since 1981. Why is that?
Well, you know, I think you're mainly talking about the suburbs, and in the suburbs, I think people want, we've seen that people want centrists. They want people who will make them feel secure about the lives that they lead, and they're nervous about some of these Democrats. The other reason I think that that the Democrats are concerned about 22 is that Republican state houses, I know I always go back to the state legislature. I can't help it. It's in my bones. But what has happened is legislature after legislature, they have changed the rules about how you certify elections. And they are in the process of changing who certifies and how a vote gets sanctioned by the state. We're going to see a lot of trickery, I think, next year, unless the Democrats find some way to pass a pro-voting law in the time they have left.
Clyde, we've seen in the primaries, the election this past month, that progressive Democrats in many cases did not do as well as many people thought. To some extent, centrists did better. What does that bode for the Democratic Party in the coming midterms? And we're also seeing now perhaps the opposite happening, or may happen with Republicans. Republican moderates may be challenged by Republican conservatives, ultra conservatives. How is that likely to play out in both parties for the coming midterms?
I'm not good at forecasts, but you know, I mean, I think the voters have said very clearly in the last two election cycles that they are in the middle, that they are moderates. That, as you say, it was certainly true in our local elections here this year. Eric Adams is a centrist, basically. The fact that Republicans increased their numbers in the New York City Council ought to tell a lot of people something, and I'm afraid it doesn't tell certain people nearly enough. And we look, Murphy nearly lost in New Jersey. Terry McAuliffe lost in Virginia, and again, Joe Biden is himself basically a centrist, and so it's no longer AOC and company's time, and I think that's what it's saying. As for the Republicans, I think it's an increasingly a wacko party, and I don't know how else to describe it. They are in the grips of these right-wing lunatics, and they have people like, Kevin McCarthy, who is not squelching these horrific folks on the right, like the wacko from Georgia, whose name in my dotage here I'm suddenly blanking on, and Boulder, and a bunch of others who are not just conservative, that's fine, but they're really nasty, break up the furniture kind of folks. And it's intolerable. And they are not being stopped by the leadership. Now, maybe the leadership can't stop them, and I don't know enough in that regard. But there is nobody who is at the top who is saying to these people, you're out of control. And I fear the Republican Party is now a radical party of extremists and weaklings who are not willing to stop them. I mean, the mere fact that Donald Trump was their presidential candidate twice suggests that this is a party that, from my rather centrist view, is out of control.
Eleanor, what does President Biden, have to do over the next couple of months, the next year, to try and recapture the public's imagination?
I think that's hard for him. As I was saying earlier, he's not really good at that part. One of the things I was thinking about listening to Clyde is that we are starting to see a division among the Republicans, and especially the Republicans in Congress. There are a few centrists who are now speaking out. They're getting their heads taken off, but that is an internal fight that is probably only going to get worse as the Republicans gain some control. I don't see Biden taking on the members of Congress the way Trump would take on Congress, or anybody who was strong enough to make a little peep in the other direction. I mean, he's not an angry politician, and that's one of the reasons that we really liked him and elected him. We needed a calming influence. I don't know how calming is going to work over the next 2 years.
It's a fair point. If I can throw in also, we are now nearly 2 full years into COVID, and everybody is obviously tired of it. Even those of us who are triply vaccinated just want normal. And so if you take the people who are even refusing to get vaccinated at all, they're, to me, they're a menace, but we're all tired. And if you get tired of the situation, you're going to take it out on the person who's running the show at the moment. And that happens to be Joe Biden.
Eleanor, is there anything that the president can do about these major issues very quickly? He's dealing with inflation, supply chain shortages, illegal border crossings, and of course, this COVID malaise. Are these within his purview?
Little bits here and there. You saw that he called in the CEOs of a bunch of corporations and said to them, tell me where along the line from the port to your store these prices are going up, and so he can do that, and that will make a difference. On COVID, he stopped people from coming from South Africa. It's a controversial move, but he did it very, very quickly. He has. You have the feeling that after Trump, that the sort of dump truck just unloaded a ton of stuff on his term, and so I find that he's doing an extremely good job, and he's got. I mean, the one thing you didn't mention is you've got Putin on the border of Ukraine, and some really scary stuff going on over there in Europe and Asia. So he does have, but that is what a president has. A president has all these different, all the big problems come to the president, and so I think his quiet nature. It works for me, but I'm not sure it works for a lot of other people.
I like your dump truck metaphor. Eleanor, Randolph, Clyde Haberman of the New York Times, thank you for joining us. And coming up next, those outdoor dining sheds, they help save New York's restaurant industry, but some neighborhoods dread the sheds. We'll tell you why in a moment. You see them everywhere, outdoor seating at restaurants and those ubiquitous sheds, some on the sidewalks, many in the streets. When the COVID pandemic shut down indoor dining, thousands of restaurants around the city moved their businesses outdoors. The Times reports that the city estimates outdoor dining saved 100,000 jobs, but opinion is split on whether the sheds and sidewalk tables are a good thing. The Times writes, quote, supporters say outdoor dining was a vital reimagining of the streets that salvaged an industry where hundreds of restaurants have shut down for good. Opponents, however, say that living on a street with outdoor dining means suffering through noise late at night, rodent infestations, and mounting trash. The structures block sidewalks, bike lanes, emergency vehicles, and parking spots. The city has to decide whether to make outdoor dining sheds permanent. How will officials weigh what's good for a major industry versus neighborhoods that are fed up with the inconvenience? We're joined by Ginia Bellafante, who writes the Big City column for the New York Times, and Nicole Hong, who covers the city's economy for the Metro Desk and was part of a team that won the Pulitzer Prize for national reporting in 2019. Ginia, should we start off by calling them something other than sheds? Maybe if we came up with a better name, that might help solve the problem.
Well, there's always the euphemistic yurts, which proponents love to use. The problem here is that the city has gone into this with a one-size-fits-all approach and really saturated neighborhoods in equal measure. And that's really the problem, because in some neighborhoods, it is working beautifully, neighborhoods that are less dense. But if you walk around the Lower East Side, which is an extremely dense neighborhood, already overrun with bars, more than restaurants. And you have people, living in tenement buildings built in the turn of the century that are porous, crowded, not as crowded as they were 100 years ago, obviously, but it's not really the right conditions. People are losing sleep. They're turning air conditioners on in the middle of winter to block out the noise, and they find the streets very hard to navigate when they're outside because the streets, in fact, are quite narrow. So in places like that, you really, really understand the grievance. If you're only experienced outdoor dining on the Upper East Side or in Cobble Hill, you are going to think it's Paris. In the beginning, everyone said, New York is Paris. It's not very Parisian and in some of these other neighborhoods.
Nicole, how vital are these restaurants to the industry itself? I was eating at one place not long ago, and they said that having an outside structure actually doubled their space because they're also serving inside. And moreover, do they have to pay anything, any additional, in effect, property taxes or fees or anything for this privilege?
So the fee structure is going to be one of the major things that the city will have to figure out next year, and kind of the public engagement process and the process of finalizing the outdoor dining rules, which is, how much should restaurants have to pay to have outdoor dining space? Before the pandemic, they did have to pay a fee to set up sidewalk cafes. So, a lot of these details are going to be worked out over the next year. I mean, a lot of the issues that Ginia mentioned around noise and cleanliness and the safety of the structures. I mean, your question about whether we should call them sheds. I mean, there's such a wide variety of them. Some of them are fully enclosed indoor spaces. Others are just a table and a few chairs on the sidewalk. So the city does face a big challenge in the next year ahead to really figure out the details of this permit program.
And Ginia, what's the problem with the heaters? I don't see how we can eat outside without heaters, certainly in the winter. Is that a special difficulty, or is that a fire hazard, or what does the city say about that?
the city, I mean, the issue around propane heaters is mostly the environmental issue. You know, they're just spewing all of this, you know, gas into the air. Many people would say unnecessarily. It seems as though the city now is trying to loosen some of the strictures around those heaters. Last year, there was kind of an emergency measure in place where, you know, restaurants were allowed to use them in gardens, and, you know, there was a run on them. You couldn't find them. People were buying them for their backyards as well. So commercial operators were in competition with residents. But, you know, ideally, I think there are electric heating lamps, which work nicely and are probably more environmentally efficient than these propane heaters.
Nicole, what is the procedure? What is the protocol from here on in? Is the city going to adopt a policy? Are there going to be hearings? How are they going to decide how to resolve this one way or another? Or, as Ginia says, try and come up with different regulations, different rules, adapt the rules for different neighborhoods?
So yeah, starting in December, city officials are going to be meeting with, you know, people all over the city, from elected officials. They're going to be doing these virtual roundtables early next year where anyone who lives in the city can come and weigh in. And as you can probably tell, everyone has an opinion on this. This is a super polarizing issue. And yeah, we'll see if this becomes kind of a neighborhood by neighborhood process. I think, you know, a lot of it's being kind of debated and finalized right now. And I'm, you know, a lot of this is just about how do you balance the competing interests of everybody who uses curb and street space, from bikers and bus riders to pedestrians and diners. So, you know, they're going to be seeking input from everybody before they figure out, you know, how to do this permanently.
And Ginia, does this in fact have anything to do anymore with COVID? Because when you look at some of these structures, particularly in the season, they are anything but outdoors. I mean, they are insulated, they are with plastic or even glass enclosures. Presumably they open up a lot more in better weather. But are these now just adding space to restaurants and giving them the benefit of more space, which may be fine for the industry? Or are they something that is protecting people to be able to dine in some sort of outdoor setting because of COVID?
I think, you know, that's a huge point of debate right now, because lots of people feel as though it was a wonderful measure for restaurants to make up what they had lost when they were absolutely closed in the beginning of the pandemic. And now there are many people, especially people living in neighborhoods where this has sort of gone on unchecked, who feel as though now we are just really giving private enterprise all of this public space. I know, you know, I just got a booster and I've been, you know, going out more lately, and it is impossible to get a reservation. It's the holidays too. It's very, very hard. It's not like restaurants are suffering. You can just walk in. It's extremely hard to get a reservation, even with this, you know, added space. So I think the city really does have to consider look at this in some way as a kind of capitulation to an industry that may now be recovered, and other industries, small businesses in these neighborhoods where there's no more foot traffic because the streets are so clogged with these dining sheds, you know, they're suffering and they want a little help too now. So that's really something for officials to think about.
Nicole, speaking of ancillary industries, you've written recently about international tourists. There's some signs they are coming back. Is there any indication where they are coming from, where they're going, and how close we are to returning to normal? That is a major source of revenue for the city. How close are we to where we were before, when we hit peaks year after year?
Yeah, so based on interviews we've done since the US reopened its borders, it does seem primarily to be European travelers, or, you know, Canada, Mexico, people closer to the US. I think obviously this new variant throws another wrench in things. I was already hearing from some business owners over the weekend, you know, who had seen a big spike from tourists, and now they're very worried about what this new variant could do for travel. So I think it's actually just a little too early to tell what this holiday season is going to look like, just given all the kind of new travel bans coming up. But I also think for a lot of these businesses, they've already had to pivot so much during the pandemic. and it's been at least 20 months without international tourists. So a lot of them have kind of adapted their business model to that.
Ginia, you are a trained observer of the city. Do you have any sense, just anecdotally, how close we are to returning to normal economically? People on the street, people going out to museums, theaters, things like that?
I mean, I think that people really want to, have really have a lot of fatigue and have been very hopeful that normalcy would have returned in the fall. And I think there's a lot of pent up energy. As I said, restaurants are full. I know from talking to people, I haven't been to the theater since lately, but theater is packed, even as tickets are exorbitant, absolutely exorbitant, because Broadway is obviously trying to make up for their lost revenue. But I think there is a lot of, especially now with the holidays, a lot of just people saying we're done with COVID. I hear that, I'm having my Christmas party, I'm finished, enough.
And are people wearing masks? Are people wearing masks?
In the supermarket I go to nearly every day, still has a mask requirement. People are extremely compliant. My son is at school is in 6th grade, mask every day. They just removed the outdoor mask requirement though. So for gym and things that are outside, they're no longer wearing masks, which makes sense. But it's funny, it's a different world. I was down south for the holidays for Thanksgiving. I didn't see a single mask. You come back to Brooklyn and everybody, is masked up.
Thanks to Ginia Bellafante and Nicole Hong of the New York Times. And for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.